This is my deluxe tree strap bag. It's a little bit of an upgrade to my last round tree strap bag, and I'm going to show you how I made it today. It's an upgrade from the last bag in that here I have the main pocket with my rainbow tree straps. That's the same. But the back here has a belt loop. You can also put that around your hand or your wrist while you're setting up and packing up. And then on the front, I have a pocket, and the pocket is big enough to keep my ridgeline for the tarp. Plus I have some dog bones with whoopee hooks on them. And I keep a spare continuous loop in there. So it's a nice compact little tree strap bag, and I've made it out of the Ripstop by the Roll 300 Hyper D, which is a fabric that I really like. So I'm just going to do an identical one like this today. I have a pattern, and there are different pieces that you're going to have to cut out. And I've marked on the pattern how many of each piece that you need to make. And also I've marked a 1-inch square. So you'll want to measure that with a ruler and just make sure that is 1 inch, and print this out in the landscape orientation. But we'll need 2 circles, which is pattern A, and then the body of the sides of the bag are patterns B. We need 2 of those, and 1 of piece C. And pattern D is going to be the belt loop to the back, and also the bottom part of this zipper. And then pattern E is the top portion of the zipper right up here. So you'll want to cut each of these pieces out, and when you do your cutting, use a pair of paper scissors. Don't cut this out with your fabric scissors or you'll ruin those really fast. In addition to the pattern pieces and your fabric, you'll want to have a piece of zipper. This is just a size 3 zipper, and I also have some zipper pulls to go along with the zipper. Just double check and make sure that you are printing this at the right scale, because if your printer prints this at a funky scale and that square here is not 1 inch, then nothing's going to assemble correctly. Now that I have all of my pattern pieces cut out, I'm going to mark them on the fabric and cut them out. But I wanted to bring to your attention the directionality of your fabric, because that will affect how the final product looks. If your fabric has a directional print, then you'll want to make sure that all of your pieces are lined up so that the orientation goes in the same direction, so that you have your prints aren't sort of cattywonk as you sew the pieces together. But this is the 300 Hyper D, which if you zoom in really closely, even though it's a solid color, the grid lines of the ripstop here, which are on an angle, are actually in a diamond orientation. And so I'm going to treat this fabric as if it were a directional print. And I'm going to lay all of my pieces so that the printing on the pattern is parallel in the same direction. It could be this way, or you could line them up this way, but I wouldn't want one piece cut this way and another piece cut that way. So I'm just going to take my pencil and mark the pattern pieces onto the fabric. You could pin the pattern pieces right down to the fabric and cut that way if you prefer that, but because this fabric has a waterproof layer, see how the back of the 300 Hyper D has this rubberized coating? I don't want to stick any unnecessary pinholes in that, so I'm going to mark it out with my pencil. I've cut out all the pieces that I need for the pattern, which I have here. And some of the pieces I needed 2 and some I've needed 1. Those are marked on each pattern piece. And then I also cut just a scrap of fabric. You want it to be at least 2 inches wide, or about 2 inches wide, but it really doesn't matter so much. I'll show you what we're going to do with this. We're going to use this to make these little tabs here to hold on either side of the zipper pull, so that when you hang on to the zipper, you can open it easily. But you could also, instead of using a scrap fabric and making these, you could just use a piece of 1/2 inch grosgrain ribbon, or you could leave those off. But I like the idea of having these because if I wanted, I could put a mini carabiner through there, and it's really handy to have something to hold on to. The first thing I'm going to do is put the zipper pulls on my zipper. I like to sew with my zipper pulls already assembled. So I'm going to need a piece to go along pattern B. So I'm going to need a piece that long. And I'm also going to need a piece to go along pattern D. But then I'm going to give myself some extra inches because I like to have my zipper pull kind of hanging off the end of the fabric while I'm sewing, so I don't have to sew around it. So I'll just cut through the zipper, and then I'm going to load my zipper pulls right on it. Getting your zipper pulls on here just is going to take a little bit of finagling, but if you see down inside your zipper, we'll zoom in, you see there your zipper has an orientation where you've got these wings coming down, and those match up with the profile of your actual zipper tape. So you'll want the high bump on the zipper pull to match the high bump on the zipper tape. And then if you separate the zipper and cut a piece so that it's a little shorter, like that, and you can load one side of your zipper pull on, and then you can hold it with one thumb and forefinger, and as you move it down you can put the sort of leading edge of the teeth of the other side into the other side of the zipper pull, and you can kind of have somewhere to pinch and move the zipper onto the zipper tape. So now you can see pretty easily on the zippers which side is the front of the zipper and what is the back of the zipper. This is the back of our zipper tape with the back of the zipper pull, and then the front has the little handle. We'll want to make note of that as we're sewing because we want to make sure that our zippers are in the proper orientation. I have my needle and my bobbin in a color thread that matches my fabric, but if you wanted to have a contrasting color thread, then do that by all means. And then I have my magnetic seam guide, and I'm going to line it up here so that it is in alignment with the 4/8 mark. So I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to do these little tab things first, and I want these to be in 1/2 inch wide. So I've got the 1/2 inch seam allowance there. And this is that scrap of fabric that I just sort of cut as I was cutting the fabric for all the pattern pieces. Doesn't really matter exactly how wide this is because we will trim it back, so long as it is at least 3/4 of an inch when it's folded over. I'm just going to buzz a straight seam all the way down, folding this in half, and I have that folded edge lined up against the 1/2 inch. Now I have this piece sewn, and I'm going to trim back this edge so that it's pretty close to the stitches. I have a little safety pin here. The safety pin is the size that it's going to easily fit between the stitch line and the fold. If you use a big safety pin, it won't fit. But I'm just going to pin the end and feed this back through on itself. Once you get it started, it's pretty easy to pull through, but getting the first couple of inches done is usually takes a little bit of coaxing. This piece doesn't need to be super long. I have more than I need here, but I'd rather have a little bit of extra room, a few extra inches, than not have enough. So okay, we don't need that safety pin anymore. I've got my nice pull tabs here. I need 2 of these, so I'm just gonna cut 2 pieces that are a couple inches long. On my example bag, my tabs are 1/2 inch long, and that's what I'm going to do here. So to just help line me up for when I'm sewing later, I'm going to fold these over and I'm going to sew them in place just with some tacking stitches. Tacking is a term just referred to keep the stitches to keep things in place. So just tack these down. Tacking these just makes sure that they're not going to torque on me while I'm sewing. Then I want to mark on here exactly how far back I need to have the stitches to the seam allowance. If I want my fold to be 1/2 inch peeking out of the fabric, and then my seam allowance is another 1/2 inch, that means I need a one inch back to mark for how much I want to have hanging out of the seam allowance. So I'm just going to line up my measuring tape here and mark a line that's 1 inch back, and then we'll use those marks later. That'll make more sense maybe later on. Okay, now we have our zipper pulls done. We have some more prep work to do. We're going to attach our zippers to the fabric. So the first one we're going to do is the side of the zipper. That's pattern piece B, and we cut out 2 pieces here. So we're going to attach each of these to the zipper. So here's my zipper pull hanging off the edge of my fabric here. It's just to the end. Don't pull it off the end though, or else you'll have to put it back on. I have my zipper pull right there, and then I have the raw edge of my fabric, the right side of it facing the right side of the zipper. And you could pin this in place if you want to. I'm just going to put 1 pin in to get me started, because the rest I'll just be able to feed through. But if you wanted to pin it all the way down, you can. And we're going to change out this foot to our zipper foot. So this is my zipper foot. Your zipper foot may look a little bit different. My foot allows me to move the foot to either side of the needle so that the zipper can be on either side of the needle. So I've got my foot lined up, and I'm going to move my needle back and forth. You see how my needle moves? I can adjust my needle so that it's further or closer to the machine. So you want to set the needle the way that you want it to run down your zipper. I don't think you need your needle super close to the zipper for this project. I think that the bag looks pretty nice having the zipper be wide like that. So I'm going to set my needle so that it's in the rightmost position. And now we're sewing for real right now. So we're not cutting off. So we want our stitches to look nice. And my machine, yours may be the same way. My machine, if I have this top thread loose, it will go down into the machine and create a little nest underneath, and we'll be able to see that. It'll be on the inside of the bag, but we'll still be able to see it. So I'm going to just hold these threads with my hand here. I've got them held taut. I'm going to depress my needle so that it's on the down position. And then with my right hand, I'm just going to line up this fabric with the end of the zipper tape. And I'm going to sew down a few stitches, and then I'm going to hit the backwards button and reverse a few stitches. And then we're just going to go all the way down. I have the edge of my foot lined up at the edge of the zipper. That's the advantage of a zipper foot, is that the zipper foot kind of tells where the zipper is. Just sort of runs right along there. And you don't have all of this crazy steering. So as if your machine, most machines come with a zipper foot. If your machine comes with one, that's great. If it doesn't, maybe see if you can get one. Okay, I'm at the bottom. I'm gonna lock my stitches here, and then this is what we have. We've got a nice straight stitch, and then when I open it, I have the right side of my zipper and the right side of my fabric. So we'll want to do the exact same thing to the other side. We have the right side of our fabric, and we're going to put that against the right side of the zipper. And if you can see here, I'm lining it up so that this piece of fabric and this piece of fabric are even. See that? If it were different, then I'd have to trim some and our zipper wouldn't fit on the bag. So we want those even. And to hold it in place, I'm just going to put a little pin in one side just to kind of tack it down for me. And then I'm going to do the same thing. We'll run the zipper down the other side. You could do it with the zipper side up or the fabric side up. It all depends. It doesn't really matter. It depends on what you want to do. I'm going to just lock my stitches here. Take your pin out before you run over it with your needle, because that could break your needle, and then you would have a broken needle part possibly flying in your face. Plus you'd have to re-thread the machine. So see how I'm coming along here? I can feel with my finger, and the foot is guiding along the edge of the zipper teeth. So even though I'm sort of sewing slightly blind here, and I can't see the zipper teeth, I'm doing a nice straight line. I have both sides now sewn on, so when you open it up, you can see that I've got my zipper with the fabric right there. And we're going to top stitch each of these down so it's held against the zipper, which will prevent the zipper teeth from grabbing the fabric. But before we top stitch it, we're going to do an overcast stitch of the raw edge. Now this 300 Hyper D has this rubberized coating on the back, and it doesn't seem to fray much, but I still think it's a good idea to do an overcast stitch the whole way down. That way when you're using the zipper back and forth, you're less likely to have fraying. So to do an overcast stitch, it's pretty easy to do, and we're just going to use the zipper foot. There's no need to change your foot. But we do want to switch to a zigzag stitch on the sewing machine. So the zigzag stitch, the leftmost zig on the stitch, I want to come just inside these stitches. And then the right side of the zigzag, I want to actually come over the edge, so it'll come off the zigzag. And that'll wrap the edge in the overcast stitch. So we'll grab onto our thread so that we don't get anything weird like that, and then we'll lock these stitches. And we're just going to have the edge of the fabric and the edge of the zipper sort of wrapped with the threads. I cut down the stitch length to a 2 for this. So here's our overcast stitch on the front, and then on the other side you can see the overcast stitch, and these zigzags just come right off the edge. We'll do that to the other side. Both sides of the fabric now have the overcast stitch, and so each side here will be more resistant to fraying. And we'll open this up. I'm just going to sort of hold it flat with my hand and press it, finger press it. You could press this with an iron. We're going to run our seam on either side of the zipper now. This is the top stitch, and this stitch is going to be visible. See here? When the bag is closed, this stitch will be visible. And so it's important that this is a nice straight stitch and that the stitches on both sides of the bag are the same distance from the zipper. So I'm going to line up the edge of the zipper teeth to the edge of my zipper foot, and then I'm going to just move my needle into the straight stitch position where I want it. I'm going to use my hands here to really push this flat. And then we're just going to try and sew as straight as we can all the way down the zipper. If you really like the alternating color thread, this would be a good place to do a top stitching thread, but I like my threads to match. So now I've come to the end. Instead of locking it off and then starting a new line, I'm just going to sew right across the zipper. Get to the other side, and then I can lift my foot and swing it around. Look, I've come too far. Let me back up one stitch. There we go. That's better. And now I'll just drive straight down the other side, pressing this flat and smoothing it out as I go. Our top stitching on this is now done. This is the front. And if I flip it, this is what it looks like from the back. So we'll do this now also to the pocket. There are two pieces to the pocket. We had pattern piece E and we had pattern piece D. And D and E will be the top and bottom of the pocket, and what we want is our zipper to be facing the direction you want. So if you're right-handed, you may want your zipper pulling towards the right, in which case it will be to the left while you're sewing. Here's our outer pocket zipper. We've got the front with the zipper pull off to the left, and then it's top stitched and it has the overcast stitch. Here are both of our pieces that we've done, and you can see how I've got the zippers just slightly longer than the pieces, and I'll trim those back, but I like that so that I can have the zipper pull attached, and now I'm not trying to feed the zipper in and have the alignment perfect. So we wasted a few inches of zipper, but we saved ourselves a lot of aggravation. So we have a few more things that we need to do to prep work. One, we're going to attach these little tabs that we made to either side of the main piece, and we're going to want to have our zipper pull moved to the inside so that it's actually able to open and close. And then we're going to attach this here so that this line that we marked, which is 1 inch, lines up with the edge of the bag fabric. And the same on the other side. We're going to sew this so that that line is tacked on there. And then when we sew the bag together and have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, it'll give us another 1/2 inch sticking out, which is what we wanted. So we have this to sew on, and then we have our other piece of pattern D, which this is going to be the belt loop portion here. And so we're just going to take the fabric and do a double rolled hem on each side. And the width of this doesn't really matter, it's how wide do you want your piece. I've got about a 1/2 inch double rolled hem on each side. So I'm going to just finger press that in place and put a few pins in it so that it's squared up. And try to get this reasonably straight. You could measure, but it's a really good candidate for eyeballing, so I'm going to eyeball it. And when I put my pins in, notice I'm putting my pins in a particular direction. I'm going to sew down this way, and that way my pin ball is oriented so that I can easily pull it out. And then I turn the fabric this way, and I can sew down this direction, and then I can pull my pins out. I'm going to also pin this in place so that I have it where I want it. And this piece of fabric, because the zipper could open, I'm going to use a few pins way back here out of the way to just sort of hold the zipper closed. Nice way to do that is to put a few pins in that cross in opposite directions. Kind of helps keep that kind of together there. And then we'll line that up so that our pencil mark is at the edge where we want it. And on this side, I'm going to put a pin on each side of the zipper. That way I make sure that the zipper pull stays closed. So this is just going to be a basting stitch on either side here. We'll make that as straight as we can get it. And then we're going to just run a straight seam here. I've got my zipper foot still on there, so let's take that off. I really like this nylon foot on this rubberized fabric. It helps to keep the fabric moving through the machine so that the feed dogs and the presser foot are not feeding it at different rates. Lock it off and do the same to the other side. When I leave the project and I stop, I try to have my needle in the down position whenever I can. That just helps me not lose my place. If you get jagged seams and you've got your needle up, that's the reason why. So here's our double rolled hem on each side. And then this is the right side of the fabric where you just have a smooth seam. I'm going to baste this so that the edge of this pencil mark is at the edge of the fabric here. I want it as straight as possible because any crookedness here is going to be exaggerated when we actually sew. and I'm going to just keep it inside my seam allowance. So what that means is it's going to be between where I'm normally going to be stitching when I assemble the bag, which is at a 1/2 inch, and the edge of the fabric. And it's a basting stitch, so it's just to lock it in place. You want to be careful when you sew over a zipper, although with plastic zippers like this it's not as big of a deal, but you could break your needle if you were to hit the zipper tooth funny, so just be careful of that. And now I don't need all this extra stuff, so I'm just going to trim that back. The side of the bag is done, and this side of the bag is a little bit trickier because the zipper is actually open. So we're just going to take a little bit extra care to make sure everything's straight. Also, I have more pins on this side, so we want to take care that we're not hitting pins, because hitting pins is a surefire way of breaking a needle. All right, I don't need these pins anymore. Okay, that's nice and secure now. And again, I don't need any of this stuff anymore, so I'm going to cut it all off. Now each of these pieces are just locked on. If you didn't want to do the little tubes, just fold a piece of grosgrain ribbon there. That's just fine. And now our zipper is not going to mistakenly come off the edge of our bag. It's actually sewn in. So that's no longer a risk. We're going to start assembling all of our pieces. We have pattern piece C here. This was the side of the bag. This goes right side facing the two zipper sides. We want the center of this piece of fabric lined up with the center of the zipper teeth. So if it's more convenient for you, you could fold that piece of fabric in half and press a crease in it. Or you could take your trusty pencil and mark it on both sides. And we want this piece lined up with the center of that zipper, right there at that edge. I'm going to put a few pins in to hold it in place. Now the width of this center piece is different from the width of this piece, and that is because everybody's going to be sewing their zippers on a little bit differently. So we have plenty of wiggle room there, and we're just going to trim it back once everything's sewn on so that it is exactly right. So we've got the center lined up with the center. I'm going to pin that in place. This piece is ready to sew. We're going to put this in the to sew pile. The second thing we're going to do is dress our circles. So we have two circles, which were pattern piece A. One circle is going to be the back of our zipper pocket. So our zipper pocket's going to go on it. So what we want to do is line the circle up so that the zipper pull and the zipper is as wide as you want it. So on this one I have a certain amount of space at the top and at the bottom. And this one, you can decide how you want it. Do you want it so that there's a wider zipper or a little bit smaller zipper? Just line it up how you want it. I'm going to do mine kind of like I did before. I'm going to line it up there. We're going to basting stitch this circle to this square, but we're going to trim away everything else first. And you see here we've got our zipper pull. We want to make sure that we don't sew this shut and cut this off. So we're going to pull the zipper pull inside, and then we're going to keep that closed and baste that shut as well. I'm just turning this upside down. Just trim around that with the scissors. You could mark it with a pencil first. I'm just going to put my hand on it and hold it flat and trim. Now that that's trimmed, it's incredibly important that you not get excited and pull that zipper piece off the edge, because that'll be a real struggle to get back on. So I'm just going to put a few pins to hold this in place around the edge, and I'm going to try and keep my pins incredibly close to the edge of the fabric. That way I'm not pinning and punching a hole through the part of this bag that we're actually going to see. We'll baste that on. We'll put this in the to sew pile. And as I get close to where this zipper is open, I'm going to take a lot of care to make sure that that's going to line up really nice and flat when we do our basting stitch, because if we get it nice and flat for our basting stitch, then it's going to be nice and flat when we finally sew the bag together. I've got my pins in sort of different directions, which will hold those in together. So this goes in the to sew pile. And then the last piece that we have here is the back piece of the bag. This is going to have the belt loop and that piece we've already sewn. So we just need to put that so that it's perfectly centered. And a good way to make sure it's perfectly centered is to just put a finger crease in it, or if you wanted, you could emphasize that line and mark it on the inside with a pencil. And then the same here, fold it in half, mark the center, and then the other side. We're marking the center. Hold that flat, and we can take these 3 pieces back to the machine and sew them. And then we're almost done. All we have to do then is just attach the circles to the bag. First ones are the sides of the bag. I'm going to run my seam straight down and through that zipper, and I've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which I have marked here with my magnetic seam guide. I'll lock my stitch and sew straight down. Because we did such a nice job basting in that tab, we can just sew right over it and we know it's in the right place. I'll lock the stitch on the other side. We'll turn it around and sew on the other side. It's pretty important to be precise on the 2 sides of the bag, because that has to line up with our circle. So this is our seam that we did on one side and then down here on the other side. And if we turn it so that it's right side out, we have our perfect little tab here, and then on this side we have a perfect little tab here, and then that will be a nice point to hold on to as you open the bag. Now, just like on the other raw edges of the bag, we want to do an overcast stitch here. So I'm going to put the machine to a zigzag stitch. I'm going to shorten my stitch length up to about a number 2. And then I'm going to start and just do this portion here, because this other little bit will trim back. But we want to make it so that we are stitching on the left side of this stitch, and the right side goes actually off the fabric. Cruise along. Now we have our overcast stitching here. I've got some various threads here that need to be trimmed. We'll do the other side. So the side of the bag is ready to go, with the exception that I've got a little bit of hangover here. So I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to trim off this hangover. Try to be as straight and consistent as possible on both sides. And the amount that you have to trim is going to really depend upon how closely you sewed your zipper, so just trim a little bit off. Whatever's hanging over, don't worry about it. This piece is now ready to attach to the circles. We're going to baste this circle to the belt loop next. So just inside the seam allowance again with a straight stitch. And it doesn't have to be a very short stitch, it can be long, because again this is just basting. You don't need to do an overlock on this portion here yet because we're going to sew it to the circle, so we'll do the overlock later, but I will trim it so that this lines up with the edge of the circle. And sew the other side down, and then again on this side just trim it so that it lines up with the circle. And this piece is ready to go. And finally we've got the basting to do to attach the outer part of the zipper pocket to the circle. I'm going to start here at the zipper part because that's my trickiest part and I want to get that over with first. I'm sewing extremely close to the edge here because these are basting stitches and I don't want them to come into the seam allowance. As I come over the zipper, I'm going to back up and lock that in. That way I'm not running any risk of losing my zipper pull off the edge of this pocket. And now it's just a matter of sewing and smoothing around. We don't want any puckers. I want to keep my needle pretty close to the edge. I would say no more than 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here on these basting stitches. And I come around to this side, same deal. I want to be really careful as I go over the zipper. I'm just going to lock that zipper in place by backing up on it a few stitches. Okay, the basting is done, and now our zipper is sewn onto the pocket and it's not going to accidentally come off. So we're now in the safety zone. So we're down to our final pieces here. We've got our pocket, we have our pouch, and we have the side of the bag that's ready to go. Now we want this zipper part to be centered to this part. I mean, it could be crooked, but that's up to you. If you want yours sort of off kilter, then do that. But to determine the center point for the side of the bag, we're just going to fold it in half along the line here. And we're going to mark the center with a pencil. I just creased that, and I'm just marking that crease. And the same here, we want this bag so that the zippers line up perfectly. And then we're going to crease the top of the bag. And mark that with a pencil so we don't lose that mark. And we're going to fold this bag apart. And we're going to crease that top of the bag so that that lines up perfectly. Now, here's the top of the bag, here's the zipper. We want the pocket at the end of the day to be like that, which means these have to face one another. And I want those two marks lining up. So I've got this mark here, that mark there. Let's get those perfectly lined up, and then we'll put a pin in it. And sew this one on first. I'm going to show you, this is laying flat. This is a problem that a lot of people are getting when they're sewing. I just want to help you with, okay? Your circle is facing down and away from you. Your side of your bag is facing up and towards you. To get this on the sewing machine right, we're going to just do one of these. See that? Then the side of the bag gets pulled out of the way. This part goes against the foot, and we steer the circle. Steer the circle around. So this is how it looks before it goes on the machine. Just like that. I have made quite a few videos up to this point on sewing circles onto bags. So I'm going to just put a link in the description and where to find those if this part confuses you. You could mark the bag, you could put pins in the bag. There are a lot of ways to do this, but I just like to use the measurement technique with my magnetic seam guide. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'll put a link to how you could do this other ways because I've explained this a number of times and I don't need to repeat myself here. But I've got my magnetic seam guide at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've got my needle coming down right in the center. And I'm just going to steer it so that this part lines up here and this part swings around. And by the time we get to the other side, if we sew precisely, we will have a perfect bag. I'm going to start sewing up at the top and lock my stitch. Now, if I come around here, I don't want to sew over zipper pulls, so let's just make sure zipper pulls are out of the way. I've got my hand here that is doing the circle guiding inside the seam allowance because I don't want to stretch the fabric out of shape. And if you happen to be tugging here at the edge, you will distort the shape of your fabric. And again, use pins. And the pin technique, I have a video where I show you different techniques. Use those techniques if this is something that is a challenge for you. And we're not stretching the fabric, we're not tugging on it, we're just guiding it, we're trying to be gentle. And I've gotten to the point where about half my bag is done. I'm going to trim my threads here so they're not in my way. But now I've got to just kind of pinch. I can't get my whole hand in there to do the guiding like I have been doing because of the side of the bag. So I'm just going to do a pinch and steer technique where I'm just going to pinch them together and try and steer them. I'm only going a few stitches at a time. Lift your foot to swing it around. And the advantage of a nylon foot is that this rubberized fabric can really slide on it. And if that is a problem and you get the top fabric feeding in at a different rate than the bottom fabric, you will have puckers. So that's why I use that particular foot. Okay, I'm coming around now to the other side of the zipper pocket, so I just want to go slow when I go over that. That way I don't have any problems. Okay, I'm getting to the point where I've almost started, so now if I've had any bunching, I'll have problems, so I just want to go extra slow. Pick up my foot every time, smooth it out. And now's the time to chill and relax. This is not a time to clench teeth. It's a-okay. Let's keep going around. And then smooth the last few times. And we'll just lock our stitches and see how we did. Let's see what we've got here. We've got a nice round bag. No real puckers because we sewed carefully, but you know, getting to this point, it takes a lot of practice in your sewing, so you'll get there. If you're not there, you'll get there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, before I put the other side on, is I've got, let's put this right side back in again and wrong side out. I've got this edge that I need to do an overcast stitch on, and it's kind of a big edge. So I think I'm going to just trim it down a little bit with the scissors. Just kind of go around there. If anything's not even, just even it up. Now that I've trimmed that, we're going to do another overcast stitch. So I'll just set this on the machine to a zigzag. And I'm going to tighten up my seam so that it's about 2. Just go all the way around the edge. Again, I want the right side of my needle coming off the edge of the fabric so that it wraps around the edge. Now that I have the first side sewn on, we'll sew the other side on. So I've got the back here, and I've marked the center of the one side. And I want that lined up perfectly with the center of the other side so that those two pencil marks are pretty lined up. I'm going to put a pin in there. And now I want to make sure the zipper is open, because if we sew this bag together, we want to be able to turn the bag right side out without having to fight the zipper. So we're going to just sew, just like we did on the other side of the bag, we're just going to sew a circle all the way around the bag. Lock my stitch, and then we'll just go all the way around, maintaining a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And again, if you want to do pins, do pins. If you want to mark every 1/8 of the bag or every 1/4 of the bag and line those up, line those up. If you want to mark the 1/2 inch seam allowance on the top circle so that you can follow a sewing guide, then do that. I've got lots of demonstrations in other videos on how to sew the circle on, and I'm doing the sort of side guide method, which is nice and fast for me. As the more circles you sew, the easier it's going to be for you to get to the point where you can just jam out on these circles, you know. This is where you get to the point where you might get a pucker on the bottom and not see it, so try to just smooth that out if you can. If you think you're getting a pucker, just lift your foot and move it around. It's no big deal. Can you see what I got going on in there? I got the bag blocking the stitches here. Let me try and bend it out of the way. I'm getting to the part here where I've started, right? This is my first seam, so I'm just going to try and not sew a pucker in the other side of the bag as I'm sewing that, which is harder to do if I'm steering this out of the way of the camera, but I'll try. Alright, that lined up pretty well. Let's lock our stitch and then we'll see where we are. Now I have another bag. Got a nice belt loop in the back. Can hang on to my pack, and in fact, that might be a nice bag for just having stuff on the side of your pack. So the pattern link will be in the description below. If you try this out, let me know. I'm really curious to see what people come up with, because there's a lot of really neat innovation happening in the DIY community. Thanks for watching.